Have you ever set some huge, ambitious goal, right? You start off super strong and then you just watch all your motivation fizzle out? Why does meaningful change feel so hard, so impossible sometimes? Well, today we're going to dive into a really powerful idea that suggests we've been looking at it all wrong. It's not about these massive revolutionary leaps. Nope, it's about something much, much smaller and way more powerful.
And that idea is right here. This quote comes from a guy named Dave Brailsford, and it's all about improving everything by just 1%. You know, this was the key that unlocked one of the most incredible turnarounds in modern sports history, and honestly, it's a principle that can absolutely change everything for you too.
So let's get into that story. It's about the British cycling team, a group that for about 100 years wasn't just bad. They were basically a running joke in the cycling world.
I mean, just to give you some perspective, in their entire 100-year history, they'd won a single gold medal. One. They'd never ever won the Tour de France. And get this, it was so bad that the top bike companies actually refused to sell them bikes. They were worried it would hurt their brand if other pros saw the British team using their gear. That's how far they had to climb.
But then, in 2003, they hired Dave Brailsford, and he came in with this really simple but kind of radical philosophy, the aggregation of marginal gains. The whole goal was to just forget about perfection. Instead, he wanted them to search for a tiny 1% margin of improvement in absolutely everything they did.
And when I say everything, I really mean everything. I mean, they took this so far, it wasn't just about comfy bike seats. They tested different massage gels to see which one helped muscles recover faster. They hired a surgeon just to teach the riders the proper way to wash their hands to avoid getting sick. They even figured out the exact pillow and mattress that gave each individual rider the best possible night's sleep. They painted the inside of their team truck white, just so they could spot tiny bits of dust that might mess with their finely tuned bikes. And you know what? The impact of all these tiny changes was anything but small. The team went on to just dominate the sport for a solid decade.
So okay, that's the what, a 1% improvement. But how do we actually use this logic in our own lives? Well, it turns out there's a really simple, repeatable system for building any habit you want.
And here it is. This is the playbook. The 4 laws of behavior change. If you want to create a good habit, you make the cue obvious, you make the craving attractive, you make the action easy, and you make the reward satisfying. And what if you want to break a bad habit? Well, you just flip it. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. Simple, right? But that first step is the most important one. You have to see your habits before you can even think about changing them.
It's like what the psychologist Carl Jung said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So many things we do every single day are just on autopilot. So the first step is just becoming aware. But once you're aware, where do you start making changes? The answer might surprise you. It's not about willpower.
It's about your environment. See, our surroundings are kind of like an invisible hand, constantly pushing us towards certain behaviors without us even noticing. Way back in the 1930s, a psychologist named Kurt Lewin came up with this really simple but profound equation. Behavior is a function of the person and their environment. So often, we try to change the P, the person, right? Our motivation, our willpower. But the most effective lever we can pull is actually changing the E, our environment.
So just how powerful is this idea? Let me share one of the most dramatic examples of this principle in action. It comes from a study of American soldiers during the Vietnam War. Researchers found that over 15% of U.S. soldiers had become addicted to heroin while they were stationed there. Now here's where it gets really wild. What happened when those soldiers came home? See, the common belief back then was that heroin addiction was basically a permanent life sentence. But look at these numbers. For a typical user who goes to rehab and then returns to their old neighborhood, the relapse rate is a staggering 90%. But for the soldiers coming back from Vietnam, 9 out of 10 of them kicked their addiction almost overnight. Why? Because their entire environment changed. All the cues, the stress of war, their social circles, the easy access, all of it was just gone.
And this gets to a huge misunderstanding we all have. We tend to think of disciplined people as having this heroic willpower. But the research shows something totally different. The people with the best self-control, they're just better at setting up their lives so they don't have to use it all the time. They're architects of their environment, not victims of it.
Okay, so let's move to the 4th and final law, which really builds on everything else. Because for a habit to really, truly stick, your brain needs one thing above everything else: an immediate reward. See, our brains evolved in a world of immediate returns. We are hardwired to care way more about the present than the future. And that's the big conflict of modern life, isn't it? The reward for smoking a cigarette is immediate stress relief. The consequence of cancer is years away. The reward for eating a donut is that instant pleasure. The consequence of poor health is way down the road. So, to build good habits, we have to find a way to make that delayed reward feel immediate.
So, how do you do that? Well, the secret is to give yourself an immediate signal that you're making progress. And one of the best examples of this comes from a young stockbroker who was just starting his career. His name was Trent Deersmid, and his daily goal was to make 120 sales calls. Now that's a daunting number. It's so easy to get discouraged halfway through a day like that. But he came up with this brilliantly simple system to keep himself going.
And his solution, man, it was so simple it's genius. Every morning, he'd start with 2 jars on his desk. One was full of 120 paper clips, and the other one was empty. After every single sales call, he would physically move 1 paper clip from the full jar over to the empty one. It gave him this clear visual proof that he was making progress. It made the work immediately satisfying, and that tiny little habit, it made him a massive success.
Okay, so we've talked about the what and the how, but there's a much deeper level to all of this, because the most powerful habits aren't just about what you do, they're about who you are.
Most of us, we set outcome-based goals. I want to run a marathon. I want to write a novel. But there's a much more powerful way to think about it: identity-based goals. Here, the focus isn't the outcome. It's about who you want to become. Don't aim to run a marathon. Aim to become a runner. Don't aim to write a novel. Aim to become a writer. Every time you lace up your running shoes, you are casting a vote for that new identity.
And ultimately, when a habit is tied to your identity, you're not chasing motivation anymore. I mean, it's one thing to say, I want this. It's something else entirely to say, I am this. When you take pride in a part of your identity, you will fight tooth and nail to maintain the habits that go along with it.
So, instead of starting with your goal, I want you to start by asking yourself this question: who is the type of person who is financially free? Who is the type of person who learns a new language every year? Start with the identity and let the actions follow.
So let's just bring it all together. We started with the power of marginal gains, that 1% better everyday idea. We saw how to build the systems for that change by designing our environment and making our progress immediately satisfying. But as we've just discovered, the most powerful shift of all is when we stop focusing on the outcome and we start focusing on our identity.
And that leaves us with this one final, crucial thought. We spend so much time thinking about what we want to have or what we want to achieve, but maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the most important question we can ever ask ourselves is simply, who do we wish to become?